Hello, Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to another episode of the Pakistan Experience. We are doing a series of these with professors. So we have the Associate Professor of Sociology at LUMS here with us. Mr. Hassan Javid, how are you doing?
I'm good, thank you, Shazad. How are you?
Good. आप तो मुल्क से बाहर हैं, आप तो बचे हुए हैं, हमारी सैर हो सकती है.
Yes, I mean, I do think often about how bad the situation is in Pakistan. I'm here in Canada at the moment on sabbatical, and yahan pe to things are pretty much under control to the extent they can be.
Yeah, but you can look down from your backyards to the country right below. And हम भी हंस सकते हैं, ठीक है यार, हमारे यहाँ सिचुएशन बुरी है, बट कम से कम अमेरिका तो नहीं है. So there's some comfort.
I mean, it's quite fascinating actually when you look at this in comparative perspective. I mean, it's quite clear that your ability to deal with the virus isn't just about how wealthy you are as a country or how developed you are. Vietnam, for instance, not a very wealthy country, but it's completely crushed the coronavirus. Then you have the United States, which has failed to do so, and the UK. So I think if in the years to come, we're going to see a lot of interesting studies on this, on exactly what it is that makes states effective.
Very optimistic that there will be years to come. मुझे तो लगता है कि the way we handle the coronavirus, now that the climate crisis escalates, if this is how people will react, मुझे कोई humanity में ज़्यादा उम्मीद नहीं है.
Yeah, Bito, we have 6 months of 2020 to go as well. तो कुछ पता नहीं क्या होता है. But I mean, the climate crisis is a good example again and I think there we have a problem in terms of the time horizons we often employ. Corporations think in the short term in terms of profit. Most governments will think in terms of 4 or 5 year terms, and most people as well don't think very long term. But absolutely, it's the climate crisis that is the one most of us should be.
Completely agree with your first assertion. I disagree with your second one because I feel governments are enslaved to these corporations. So even with coronavirus and Pakistan, companies were like, "आप अभी हमें करने दें. आपने लॉकडाउन लगाना है, आप महीने बाद लगा लें. Let us at least make as much money as we can in the short run." And governments were like, "Yeah, go ahead, do that." So, but you don't actually calculate the cost of doing business in the short run because once the cat's out of the bag, फिर उसको वापस कंट्रोल करना तो बहुत मुश्किल है. But I mean, coronavirus.
And we're beginning to see that now. I mean, just to kind of clarify, I am sympathetic to the dilemma Pakistan has faced in this time. I do feel that the government has mismanaged the response to the coronavirus. But having said that, it is difficult to impose lockdowns of the kind that are arguably required to deal with a pandemic like this. I mean, it's quite clear lockdowns work, but imposing them has its own costs. So I'm sympathetic to the government's dilemma. I think the government could have done it better when it did do it. And I think what we're heading towards, unfortunately, is a situation where, as you said, the cat is out of the bag, but we'll still end up imposing a lockdown anyway. And agar karna hi tha, may as well have done it properly the first time around.
Horses for courses वाली बात है ना, अल्ताफ भाई को इस्तेमाल करना चाहिए था. I had Norbert on the last episode and he had a great point. He said कि it's about fear, right? If Altaf Hussain, it's not like he had some magical power. He ruled with fear. अगर वो लॉकडाउन कहते थे तो लॉकडाउन लग जाते थे because लोगों को पता था कि मर जाएंगे नहीं तो. The fact that we made coronavirus a joke by calling it a flu, वो fear factor खत्म हो गया था. तो yes, आप डंडा मार के तो कोई बंद नहीं करवा सकते. But at least you can honestly tell people the severity and not underplay that repeatedly by either calling it the flu or mocking people who wear masks. तो लोग फिर खुद से भी नहीं करेंगे लॉकडाउन क्योंकि they don't really think coronavirus is a big deal.
Well, I mean, I think that is the key point. I mean, the communication strategy, I feel, from the government has been very poor. I mean, we ideally, in an ideal world, we don't want a government that rules through fear. But having said that, it was important to educate people about the risks of the virus. But the other big thing is trust. I mean, I have a colleague at LUMS, Dr. Samin Ali, who's been working on vaccinations in Pakistan.
Nice.
And I believe, I mean, you could ask her for more specifics, but my understanding is that one of the major impediments to polio vaccinations in Pakistan is trust, a lack of trust in the government, a lack of trust in the idea that the government is looking after your best interests. So you may have heard all these rumors about how people were saying that hospitals are receiving money for reporting coronavirus cases and God knows what they're injecting into us and so on and so forth. There is a lack of trust in the government because of the state's historic failure to actually provide for its citizens. And I think the government should have tried to do a lot more very early on to cultivate a greater sense of trust in what it was doing through clear communication. But instead, as you said, for various reasons, they chose a different route. And I think we're all going to pay for that now.
I mean, I meant the fear of coronavirus, not the fear of the government.
Well, yes.
Conspiracy theorists to har jagah hote hain. It's just they're emboldened by what they see, right? So when they see Trump or when they see Imran Khan, they're like, okay, they're not wearing a mask. They're not following any SOPs. They're out and about. हम अगर टीवी शो चलाते हैं तो उस पे क्राउड है, मॉर्निंग शोज हो रहे हैं, तो वेट ये हमें उल्लू ही बना रहे हैं ना, कुछ ये सब तो कुछ भी नहीं कर रहे सारे के सारे. So then obviously, plus you have television channels like Bowl where you have people like Zaid Hamid and Faisal Raza Abedi peddling the worst conspiracy theories with like कि हमारे पास सारे evidence हैं ये conspiracy है. तो फिर I mean वही argument है कि जी अवाम जाहिल नहीं है, अवाम को जाहिल रखा गया है. Obviously they will believe these things because they're putting 2 and 2 together.
I mean, absolutely. I've never subscribed to the idea that people are stupid. I mean, people are quite good at identifying what their interests are. People are quite good at expressing what they want. The problem is often people work with faulty information.
Yes.
When you don't have the right set of facts, when you don't have the right information about what you want to do, then you can kind of rationally arrive at the wrong decision, if that makes sense. I mean, you
Absolutely.
can calculate based on the information you have, this is the right course of action or that is the right course of action. And that's exactly what's happened here. As you said, I mean, the government should have cultivated a healthy fear of the coronavirus. They should have said, yes, it's a very serious thing. It's not a flu. We have to follow these SOPs. If we do a lockdown, this is how we're going to do it. This is what you must do. You're all going to die if it doesn't work. I mean, that is exactly the kind of messaging that was required. But again, no, and for various reasons. I mean, I do think part of it was simply the idea that we don't want to spread panic.
Yeah.
But that was absolutely the wrong way to go about it. And now I think panic will spread on its own.
So मुझे तो बहुत गालियाँ पड़ती रहती हैं, इसलिए मैंने आपको आज बुलाया था कि तुम सिर्फ क्रिप करते रहते हो, कंप्लेन करते रहते हो, don't offer any solutions. And I'm like, I'm a comedian. मुझसे why do you need economic solutions from me? And then I posted your thread which had some good solutions. So can you please let us know कि हम सिर्फ complain अगर ना करें, तो what are some of the things we can do now? अब चलें, पानी सर पर आ गया है, but अब बाल्टियों से पानी निकाले कैसे?
About the coronavirus.
Yes. What does the economic response or any suggestions?
Well, there are a couple of things I think the government can still do or should be doing. First of all, just again to clarify, there are things that work in theory. There are things that we know are good ideas. And then the question of whether or not you can actually implement them is, in a sense, a separate kind of question. So to be fair to Imran Khan and the PTI, this entire idea of smart lockdowns is, in theory, not a bad idea. The problem, the devil is in the detail. And you may have come across this thing on Twitter a couple of days ago when Imran Khan shared a news story that said smart lockdowns are great. But you know, the fine print.
Hashtag PMIK leading the world.
Leading the world. But if you look at the actual article, it says it works after you've already flattened the curve. But the truth is they do work, right? Once you've managed to contain the virus, what you do then is you ramp up testing considerably. You isolate clusters of the disease, and then you lock those down. And that way you contain the spread while simultaneously not bringing life to a halt. Now, the government's very fond of claiming that it's doing exactly that. But every time they say that, all the evidence they really give is from Islamabad, where they say we shut down this sector and we shut down that sector. The rest of the country, it's not very evident that this strategy has been followed in any meaningful way. There are a couple of things the government can do and should do. Number one, it really needs to boost levels of testing. There's very little confidence in the numbers coming from the government in terms of the number of people who have the coronavirus. And any successful smart lockdown strategy requires high levels of testing. I mean, this is basically an indisputable fact. I mean, anyone who says otherwise is misinformed. You need to have a much higher level of testing. The second thing is, once you have that testing, once you've developed this capacity to more accurately identify where the disease is, then you implement these kind of smart lockdowns. And what we've been seeing over the past 10 days, and it's still not clear to me at all why this is the case, but what we've been seeing over the past 10 days is a decline in testing levels in Pakistan. I mean, it's not evident to me at all why this is the case. And from the very beginning, there's been this kind of blame game going on where the Sindh government says the federal government's done it, and the federal government says the Sindh government's done it. It doesn't really matter. The broader picture, the broader point is testing levels have gone down. Why have they gone down, even though there's capacity to do more testing? The other thing is, inevitably, if it turns out to be the case that the coronavirus is spiraling out of control, then there will have to be more extensive lockdowns. And over there, I think the government needs to double down on the one good thing it has done in this entire affair, which is the identification of a larger number of recipients for Benazir income support and Asas cash transfers. I mean, that's an unqualified, I mean, there's no two ways about it. That was a great idea. You see countries around the world, richer countries than Pakistan, implementing similar schemes. And the very fact that Pakistan has developed the capacity to do this over the past few years, and there's a whole history behind that, but the very fact that Pakistan can administer a cash transfer program of this nature is very impressive. I think the government needs to double down on those kinds of measures to make a lockdown workable. It's absolutely...
There was some criticism about the cash element of it though. They said that digital payments jo thi, usme the government claimed corruption bahut zyada thi, to humne cash kar diya, but that then led to clusters being formed. I mean, I was in Karachi, literally, I saw bank ke bahar line lagi hui hoti thi, and then all the photo ops that you saw, it had the entire village clustered in one place for cash handouts. The
criticism
being कि photo opportunities के लिए कर रहे हैं.
Oh, acha. I mean, again, those are technicalities. I think logistical technicalities that can be worked out. Digital payments may not always be the best idea. It's not going to be possible for everyone. The key point is to try to get money to as many people as possible through whatever means are available. And again, I'm a great believer in the idea that when they set their mind to it, governments and even the Pakistani government can get things done. I mean, we often talk a lot about state failure. We talk a lot about the inefficiency of the state in Pakistan. And it's true, there's a lot to be critical of. But the way I see it is a bit different. I don't think the government lacks capacity as much as it lacks the ability to coordinate and make use of the capacity that it has. And I think given a coherent plan, given a coherent strategy, things like the cash transfer program can be administered quite well. And I think that's what the government should be looking towards in the coming months. The possibility that extended lockdowns might require a substantial expansion of the social safety net, such as it is in Pakistan. And that might turn out to be a very good thing in the long run either. Historically, around the world, the expansion of welfare programs has often occurred in response to crises of this nature, whether they're wars, natural disasters. I think there's very few people who would disagree with the idea that Pakistan should be seeing a greater emphasis on investments in welfare. And this is a good way to do that. And again, this is for me a non-partisan point. It doesn't matter which government does it, but it's a good idea. It should be done.
So what the debate that you might see around this issue in America is the Republican Party would argue people need to pull them up from the bootstraps. You can't give them handouts. Pakistan mein itni nuanced debate bhi nahi hoti, right? Pakistan mein, agar you bring this point up, and I've been arguing for that for a while as well, the simple response is, hey, nahi. हम तो ये कर ही नहीं सकते, ये कैपेसिटी नहीं है, गवर्नमेंट क्या पैसे देती रहेगी. Even Imran Khan showed another slip of tongue. Yes. But I think he said कि हम कब तक इनको पैसे खिलाएंगे, and I was like, wait, पैसे खिलाएंगे? That's what the tax money is for, social welfare programs. It's for the benefit of everybody. Plus, even जब राशन दे दिया था और पैसे दे दिए थे, before that month was even over, they started opening industries because pressure तो फिर bosses से आ रहा था ना.
I mean, पैसे खिलाने की जो बात है, I mean, there's so many ways to kind of think about that. I mean, think about subsidies received by the sugar industry, for instance.
वो तो अपने लोग हैं ना. वो तो पार्टी कैसे चलेगी फिर?
think about this
sugar daddy के बगैर थोड़ी कुछ हो जाएगा.
Think about this debacle around the petrol prices. I mean, think about the various kinds of incentives given to the construction industry. That's also paisa khilana at some level. It's just that one is not portrayed as such. I mean, that's in a way that's institutionalized corruption. And
it's the same Republican Party argument, right? Trickle down economics. कि इनको दे दो और वो कभी ना कभी पहुंच जाएगा.
I mean, everyone's still waiting though. I mean, we're still waiting for that trickle down. Abhi tak trickle up hi ho raha as far as we can see around the world. And so, I mean, that's one way of looking at it. The other way is a simple point that, look, it's a common argument. I mean, it's quite common in Pakistan as well. Poor people are poor because they don't work enough. Poor people are poor because there's something wrong with them. But obviously, I mean, if you think about it at a kind of more broader, more structural level, that's obviously not true. I mean, children born into poverty will have very different opportunities and very different life chances from children who are born into wealth. I mean, there are studies around the world, for instance. I remember one study in the UK which demonstrated how 5-year-olds, there were great differentials between 5-year-olds in terms of the number of words they knew, the size of their vocabularies. Children born into relatively rich and middle-class households had much larger vocabularies than children born into working-class households. This is before they started attending school, even before that point. Why? Because middle-class parents and rich parents had more time to spend with their children. They had more time to read to their children. They could afford to buy books and keep them around. Working-class parents were often too busy to be able to indulge in those kinds of activities. The end result, before you've even entered school, you've got this great differential, this divide between different children simply based on the families they were born into. As I often tell my students at LUMS, they're not necessarily at LUMS because they're very smart. They may be smart. I mean, I'm not doubting some of them are. Many of them are.
I have my doubts.
Yeah.
Especially after reading recent posts, I really have my doubts.
Today I learned that some bright spark sent a letter saying Malala shouldn't be the convocation speaker.
And Bilal Khan should be. Bilal Khan should be.
I have no issue with Bilal Khan, but I mean...
इन बच्चों से बचाना चाहिए उनको. I do think बचाना is a good soundtrack. अगर LUMS का intellect level ही हो गया है, कुछ डूब तो रहे हैं हम ये सारे.
I mean, and वही बात है कि yes, some of them, sure, they've probably done well in school. Some of them are undoubtedly very bright. But I would wager that you would find similarly bright children, similarly bright students around the country who would never be able to come to LUMS simply, not just because they're not wealthy enough. After all, LUMS is an expensive place, financially notwithstanding, but also because they simply wouldn't have had those opportunities leading up to college that would enable them to come to a place like LUMS. So what we see is this kind of intergenerational persistence of poverty and this kind of lack of social mobility. The class divide in Pakistan is very large, and it's very static as well. There isn't that, I mean, people keep talking about the growing middle class in Pakistan, and there's a lot of academic debate over that. Sure, it's happening. But the vast majority of the country are still poor. And the relative gap between the rich and the poor has only gotten worse. And so the idea that kitni der mein paise khilate rahenge, I mean, it's just that you have to provide people with opportunities. You have to provide them with it's not a level playing field by any stretch of the imagination. And I think there's nothing more important than having systems in place that allow people to reach their full potential, to be able to lift themselves out of poverty. And ultimately, I mean, I think that's what the hallmark of a good society is, this recognition that you're in it for the collective good rather than for the individual pursuit of whatever interests you have. And I think that kind of collective effort is what Pakistan should frame the response to COVID in terms of as well.
So I agree with you academically, but you do talk about this as well. I think elephant in the room ignore kar deti hai na ye baat. Should we allocate all the resources there? Absolutely should we. अभी कहाँ किए हैं हमने allocate resources? जो फरोख सलीम आर्ग्यू करते हैं कि आप झूठ बोल रहे हैं, बिल्कुल ज़्यादा नहीं है inflated budget. किस तरह आप कह रहे हैं, बिल्कुल जायज़ budget है. and आपकी काफी disagreements हैं. For people who still haven't understood what I mean, it's the military budget, right? अगर हमारी इतनी allocation resources वहाँ हो रही हैं, तो yes, there is absolutely mismanagement as well. We did a podcast on education where Ahad was arguing कि मसला पैसों का नहीं है, मसला ये है कि ये allocate गलत हो रहे हैं, and systems improve everything. That's a separate debate. But just in terms of the budget, you disagree. You do think military budgets inflated है.
The first thing I'd say is that absolutely, as you said, and as others say as well, there's a lot of inefficiency, there's a lot of mismanagement. Let's say you're spending 4 billion rupees on education in Pakistan. Half of that is wasted, quite possibly. You could do more with that 4 billion than you are right now, with better management, with more efficient resources, utilization of resources. But my claim is simple. You could do a lot more with 8 billion and reform. The two things aren't mutually exclusive. The idea that it has to be one or the other, that we can only have reform or we can only have increased resources, those two things don't necessarily have to be mutually exclusive. And it's not even about sequencing. I think very few countries have the benefit of being able to start with perfect systems. No country has perfect systems. Systems evolve over time. And more often than not, access to more resources helps evolve those systems. So that's the first point. But on the second point about whether we misallocate resources in Pakistan, I'll just start with what I think is a very striking statistic, especially when you think in terms of the COVID pandemic. The military budget for 2020-2021 has an 11% increase over the past year. I think that comes to about 120 or 130 billion rupees. That's the total amount. That amount is equivalent to the entire size of the BISP ESAS cash transfer program. That for me is very striking, because as we were just discussing earlier, one of the best things this government could do is make the cash transfer program more sustainable for a longer period of time to help weather the effects of this pandemic. Not make people choose between their lives and livelihoods by saying, hey, here's some money, you stay home, you support yourself. But instead, we've chosen to allocate money to the military. And increase, by the way, it's not even when I say that 130 billion rupees, if you took that away, you probably have a slight decrease in real terms because of inflation, but it's not exactly a massive cut to the military budget. For me, that's a very striking statistic. But on the broader point, look, if you look at the numbers, and I've been, as you know, I've been having arguments about this on Twitter for the past couple of weeks. No matter how you look at it, it's pretty clear. Pakistan spends more on its military than many comparable countries, and also more on its military than many countries that are not quite so comparable. The figure that people like Farooq Salim throw about is 2.7, 2.8% of GDP. That's how much Pakistan apparently spends on its military. First of all, that too is a relatively high number. But when you include what we could call hidden costs, when you include the costs of military pensions, for instance, when you include supplementary grants, when you include spending on the nuclear program, which is classified, you start approaching 3.5% of GDP and above. Now, let's put that in perspective. Pakistan's a low middle income country. That means it's got a per capita income between $2,000 and $3,500 a year. Bangladesh and India are in that same category. Your average lower middle income country spends between 2 and 2.5% of its GDP on defense. Pakistan is, as I said, almost twice as much as that. Pakistan spends more on its military as a percentage of GDP than India does, than Bangladesh does. The only country in the region that even comes close to Pakistan in those terms is Iran. But Iran is also much wealthier than Pakistan. The United States spends less on its military as a percentage of GDP. Again, the United States is a $20 trillion economy. They can afford to do this. Israel spends more. Israel's got a much more robust economy. Saudi Arabia spends 8% of its GDP on its military. Again, Saudi Arabia can afford to do that. Pakistan, given its economic profile, Pakistan spends a disproportionate amount on its military. Then you look at social indicators and you find that Pakistan lags behind on that as well. Pakistan spends less on health and education than comparable countries. And Pakistan lags behind on various social indicators. There are two indicators in particular that I like to focus on because I think they tell you a lot about the state of Pakistan today. The first is youth literacy. This is not the overall literacy rate. This is youth literacy. This is people aged 15 to, I think, 25. What you find there is that in the region, in India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka achieved 100% literacy in that category a while ago, so did Iran. But even if you look at Bangladesh and India, they've approached almost 100% youth literacy. Pakistan is at around 70%, 72%.
I would have pegged it for much lower if I look at Twitter pe youthia literacy. I would feel like inki to 7% bhi nahi hai.
I mean, again, how we define literacy is also very interesting. It's
I think Pakistan, if you can sign your name, you're literate.
I think they've upgraded it to if you can write a sentence, but it's not exactly a very expansive definition. My name is Shahzad. Yeah. I mean, I think that's a striking statistic because that tells you a bit about the future. Whereas our regional competitors, our neighbors and rivals, have a younger generation that is almost fully literate. We are still, in a sense, a generation behind.
We take a lot of pride कि जी हमारी तो young जो है ना हमारी we have इटली में तो लोग इसलिए मरेंगे सारे बुढ़े रहते हैं पाकिस्तान में तो हमारी 80% young but देखें भी तो आप कर क्या रहे हैं young लोगों के साथ नाम नहीं लिखना आता है.
You know, there's people say Pakistan needs to harness its youth dividend, and you know, yes, you can have a youth dividend, but you need to do something with all that youth. And unless you invest in their health and education, what are you going to do with them? They're not going to outperform their competitors in the years to come. So that's one statistic I think is very striking. The second statistic is child mortality, under 5 child mortality. Pakistan has one of the highest under 5 child mortality rates in the world. About, if I remember correctly, it's around 70 to 80 children per 1,000 live births die in Pakistan. That's about 7%. 7% of children born in Pakistan will die before they see their 5th birthdays. Now think about that for a second. And again, putting this in comparative perspective, India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, all of these countries now have child mortality rates hovering around 2 or 3%. Sri Lanka, though, I think is less than 1% now. The more striking thing is all of these countries started at roughly the same pace as Pakistan. If you go back 30 or 40 years, all of these countries had child mortality rates in excess of 10%. Pakistan is still at around 7.5%. Everyone else is down to 2 or 3%. My favorite, again, point of comparison is Ethiopia. Ethiopia had a much higher child mortality rate than Pakistan back in the 80s. And, you know, when people think about Ethiopia, they mistakenly associate Ethiopia with famine, with war, with deprivation. Ethiopia has actually been doing quite well over the past 2 decades.
Which is ironic because Ethiopian cuisine is great.
It
so
is
या तो वो खुद कुछ नहीं खाते और सारा अमेरिका में खोल लेते हैं restaurants.
Well, at any rate, Ethiopia has done tremendously well over these past 20 years. And that's a whole other discussion. But the point is, Ethiopia's child mortality rate is now lower than Pakistan's.
And Pakistanis would probably give that example. हमको Ethiopia थोड़ी है,
Absolutely. But that's the thing. When it comes to these particular indicators, Pakistan is truly amongst the worst in the world. When you look at literacy, when you look at mortality, when you look at life expectancy, and so on and so forth. So my question is simply this. Are these not important issues that have to be dealt with? And when we talk, I mean, everything in Pakistan is a war. There's a war on mafias, there's a war on drugs, there's a war on this, there's a war on that. If there is a war to be fought, it should be a war for welfare. I mean, what's the point of a massive military machine if your people are going to fall victim to poverty and deprivation? How on earth, even if you accept the claim that Pakistan's military needs are exceptional and unique and necessary, how are you possibly going to compete with a country like India, who's already so much larger than you, and which is now on an economic trajectory that Pakistan will probably not be able to match if it continues down its current path. I mean, again, go back to the youth literacy point I was making earlier. In a way, we're already a generation behind. How is this sustainable in the long run? And in my guess is that, you know, if we take a long enough time horizon, forget the next 5 years and the next 10 years, 40, 50 years down the line, what will Pakistan really be able to do about a much larger, much more powerful neighbor that, for all we know, would probably be an economic powerhouse?
हमारे है ना ईस्टर्न कॉलोनियल पावर, वो हमारी मदद करेंगे ना, है ना भाई हमारे. They will take over. We're like, ठीक है, जितना है अभी हम लूट लेते हैं, बाकी जो बच गया वो चाइना को दे देंगे आराम से. Chinese बैरियर डाउन बना देंगे पूरे पाकिस्तान को. I'm kidding, but I do genuinely think यही है हमारा long-term vision.
I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if that is indeed the vision that some of our strategic planners have for Pakistan. But again, that's a very strategic depth, just the other way around. We're someone else's strategic depth. And so that's why I think the point about the military budget is this. When I wrote my first thread about this, responding to Farooq Salim, there were all these people. I mean, everyone's a military analyst in Pakistan, so they all kind of show up on Twitter and they're like, "Aapko nahi pata, we've got a neighbor who's 7 times larger than us, and they're doing this and they're funding that." Threat perception index.
किस पाकिस्तानी को ये नहीं पता? You should have been like, wait, कौन है हमारा नेबर? ये तो मैंने कभी देखा ही नहीं खिड़की खोल के कि इंडिया जैसा.
एक थ्रेट परसेप्शन इंडेक्स होती है, ठीक है, उसके हिसाब से आपको बजट बनाना होता है, ये वो एटसेट्रा एटसेट्रा. आप क्यों, why are you comparing Pakistan to Bangladesh, ये वो? I mean, my first response to that is, how come nobody asked this when you're comparing Pakistan to the United States or Saudi Arabia and their militaries and saying, उनकी इतनी बड़ी है, तुम्हारी क्यों नहीं हो सकती? I mean, या तो कहो Pakistan unique है, किसी के साथ comparison हो नहीं सकता, or admit that, you know, there might be better comparisons to be made. But the broader point is this. Is there an alternative to the current trajectory that Pakistan's been following? I mean, I think there's two ways of looking at this. The first is, does Pakistan face external threats? The answer, honestly, is yes.
Yeah.
I mean, without a doubt, especially if you look at the kind of antagonism that Pakistan faces in its immediate neighborhood. Undoubtedly, I mean, Pakistan has a hostile relationship with India. Pakistan has a hostile relationship with Afghanistan. Pakistan has a hostile relationship, more often than not, with Iran. There are external threats. But the second question, and you know, most of the analysis in Pakistan stops there, कि हाँ, external threats हैं, हमें
which also assumes कि बस खुदा ने भेजे external threats और हमने खुद कुछ नहीं किया.
But that's exactly the point. That was what I was going to say. But the second dimension is, हमने क्या किया? Why are we in such a hostile neighborhood? And is there something that we might have done or that we are doing that makes our security situation much worse than it needs to be? And I think that's where we really need to have a discussion about alternatives to this kind of militaristic approach to foreign policy and securing Pakistan's strategic interests. Ek to baat clear, India, yes, there's a hostile relationship. Was it always hostile? Mostly. Were there points in time where Pakistan and India could have worked harder to achieve peace? The answer is yes. Were there points in time where peace overtures were sabotaged? Absolutely. Right? As Aisha Jalal has argued, in a way, those in power in Pakistan, the establishment, benefits from constant hostility with India, because that justifies everything that we see happening around us. And then after a while, in a way, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. One of the people who was arguing with me on Twitter said, "Dekho, wo baatein sari sahi hain. That's all fine. Theek hai, we made mistakes, but now we're in the situation we're in. So ab kya kare? Now we have to deal with all of this. To uske liye fauj chahiye." That's exactly it. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah.
And I think we need to take a step back and think about how we can start to reverse the damage that's been done in the past. And I mean, the biggest example of this for me is, again, a lot of people rightly point out Pakistan's been fighting a war against terror on its own soil, and that, many people have died, many sacrifices have been made. Yes, but why were they there in the first place, right? Why is it that militant groups were able to establish such a strong foothold in Pakistan in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s? Why were they in a position to then be able to turn on the Pakistani state and wreak the terrible devastation and destruction that they did? That's the question that needs to be asked.
If you're arguing incompetency, that why we weren't able to prevent, I would argue कि हम तो चाह रहे थे कि यही हो. वो तो partnership में हो रहा था ना. I mean, if you're talking about the 80s,
in a way, yes.
These militant groups.
They were our militant groups until they weren't. I mean, that's
which
exactly
is what militant groups are.
Which is what if you sow the wind, you're going to reap the whirlwind. That's how this works. Those are the questions we need to ask. That what can we do to prevent this from happening again? What can we do to make sure the strategic mistakes of the past are not repeated? And I think the most important thing we can do is to start to actually have these debates and to start to actually ask these questions. At the end of the day, the military is a public institution. It runs on public money. Every other aspect of the budget is debated. Why can't there be a debate on this? If there is a case to be made for a high military spending, take that case to the people. Take it to Parliament. Have an open and transparent discussion about it. As I've also said to others, maybe even if we accept at face value the idea that Pakistan has unique security needs and that military spending can't be compromised on, isn't it possible? Isn't there just the smallest possibility that there might be waste and inefficiency in the military budget? That a review of how that money is spent, just like with education, just like with healthcare, we talk about inefficiency in every other state institution in Pakistan. Could it be the case that money can be saved by evaluating how well our money is spent when it comes to the military? Is it not possible that we can engage in a multi-year exercise where a careful and transparent review of the budget is undertaken, and at the end of which it's decided, look, these are areas where we've identified cost-cutting measures, yahan pe aap kam karen, and pass that money on to the provinces to invest in health and education and so on and so forth. That's not an irrational demand to make. That's not an anti-national demand to make. It makes perfect sense. It's all I'm saying is, why can't there be an audit?
Uber notification आने वाली है आपको. आप फोन I don't know अगर Vigo होती है कनाडा में, but SUV कोई ना कोई आ ही जाए.
Why can't we have an audit? Why can't we just say कि देखो यहाँ पैसे खर्च हो रहे हैं. Is it valid? Does it make sense? If it does, sure. If it doesn't, then maybe that money can be better utilized everywhere. My point is, at least
we need to plot where the money is going. If we plot it on a graph, we can plot exactly where the money might be used. Another question about this. Another thing which all these comparisons sort of ignore is Pakistan ki debt reservicing. There's also an argument कि debt reservicing को अगर आप डालते हैं as a component, उसके बाद जो पैसे बच जाते हैं, उसका तो फिर एक बहुत ही बड़ा chunk है military budget, even if it's not, still it's a big component of the GDP itself. But when we're doing these comparisons with other countries, are we also taking into account how much they spend on debt reservicing?
I mean, so as it turns out, I mean, again, if you look at if you make the right comparisons, you'll find that similar countries have similar kinds of debt profiles as well. India has a lot of debt, for instance. Bangladesh has a lot of debt. Most countries like Iran have a completely different set of issues altogether. They have sanctions. Ethiopia is a good example. I mean, I used it in one of my comparisons earlier, and Ethiopia is an interesting example because it's poorer than Pakistan. Still, it's poorer than Pakistan. But like Pakistan, it's faced various kinds of security threats over the years. It's engaged in wars with some of its neighbors. Its military plays a tremendous role in its politics. Ethiopia is a heavily indebted country. Yet most of these countries also managed to reduce military spending over time. Absolutely, debt is, I think, so first of all, since the end of the Cold War, you've seen a kind of decline in global spending on global military expenditures. I mean, there's been a worldwide decline in the amount of money that's spent on the military. Pakistan, for instance, was spending about 7% of its GDP on its military back in the 1980s. Today, that figure is about 3.5%, I was saying. Similarly, most lower middle income countries are spending around 3.5% to 4% in the 80s. They're spending about 2.5% now. So there's been this kind of global decline. Pakistan's still higher than average, but there has been a global decline. But I think part of the decline in Pakistan can be attributed to debt servicing. I think the fact that the debt burden in Pakistan is becoming more and more onerous is one of the reasons why fewer resources are available for the military. And as some have argued, actually, that might be one of the principal reasons why there's so much resentment in some circles about the 18th Amendment, the idea that all this revenue is automatically transferred to the provinces when it could perhaps be better utilized on federal programs like debt servicing and the military. So it does impose a cost on Pakistan. That's all the more reason to consider where we can save money elsewhere. Right? The debt burden is the debt burden. It's that either you default or you pay it back. And if you are going to pay it back, then you're going to have to make cuts elsewhere. And my point again is that if you can make cuts in education, and if you can make cuts in healthcare, and if you can make cuts in every other area, why is it so inconceivable to think that you can make cuts in military spending as well?
I think we can see this a little more clearly जब थोड़े हम detached हों, हमारे personal biases उसमें ना आए. If we talk about America and the military-industrial complex, it's clear to us that they need the never-ending war just to keep the economy as to what it is. अब वो specifics में अगर आप जाएं तो Dick Cheney, Halliburton, whatever. But even it seems like their economy assumes there will be a war for it to sustain itself or for it to grow like it's growing. Are we trying to replicate that without being as big or as powerful as they are?
As I said before, and I think at least within a lot of the scholarship, the historical scholarship in Pakistan, there is what you could call, I suppose, a consensus on the idea that maintaining hostility with India does perpetuate the status quo in which the military establishment exercises a tremendous amount of control over Pakistan's political economy. Putting it very simply, if there was no hostility with India, what would be the point of this entire military complex that we have in Pakistan? Now, depending on your ideological biases or your politics, I mean, it's a kind of chicken and an egg problem. Is the military-industrial complex there because India poses a threat, or does India pose a threat because the military-industrial complex says it poses a threat? That people, I think, can decide for themselves. But I think, as I said, there's a historical consensus that, if nothing else, it does certainly benefit the powers that be to maintain this kind of hostility. And again, I think of this, if you take a kind of broader, kind of long-term view, think about the shared challenges India and Pakistan have. One issue that I think not enough people think about, but I think are increasingly thinking about, is water. Yeah. We mentioned climate change earlier, and South Asia is one of the most water-stressed regions in the world. And if climate change occurs as quickly and with as much as intensity as many experts believe, then what we're likely to see within our lifetimes is persistent drought throughout South Asia and a progressive dwindling of water resources. Now, given that this is a problem that India and Pakistan will share. It's a problem they are sharing. Look at the kind of politics, look at the kind of diplomatic conflict India and Pakistan have already had over the waters of the Indus Basin, over the rivers, about the construction of dams and so on and so forth. It's not realistic to imagine that these problems can be solved without some kind of diplomatic solution. There isn't a military solution to this problem. You're not, if the belief is that you can solve this problem by fighting wars over it, that's not a solution. That's just going to be the end of all of us. This is just one example of the kind of shared challenge that's going to require India and Pakistan one day to speak to each other. And so I think, again, the logic that we need to have perpetual war, that India is the eternal enemy, is ultimately a self-defeating kind of logic to pursue. I mean, and just to clarify, this requires political will on both sides. There's hawks on India. I mean, just look at Indian media, for instance. Look at what's been happening with, what's that guy,
Arnab Goswami. Chinese surgical strike. We have done a surgical strike with China. Surprise attack on China with banning all their apps.
Absolutely. I mean, there's no shortage of hawks. There's no shortage of nutcases on that side as well. But one can, look, we can't change how they think. One will hope they come to their senses, just as one hopes that we will as well. As a Pakistani citizen, as someone who's invested in the prosperity of Pakistan, I think it's important for all of us to reflect on these questions and think about what we can do to bring about a more peaceful and stable future for ourselves and our children.
I think Modi has really weakened this argument, though. For years, I mean, scholars have also looked at India and said, देखें, secular democracy हो सकती है, उनकी military ने देखें बिल्कुल नहीं intervene किया, उनकी religious bigotry इतनी ज़्यादा नहीं है. And now, I agree with all of what you say, but you will be responded in one word if you put that down on Twitter, Narendra Modi.
No, again, let me be clear. Modi and his brand of majoritarian are pretty close to fascism. They are. There's no denying it. And I'll go a step further. This has been brewing in India for the past 20 years. There was this fantastic collection of essays put together by a group of French scholars. It was edited, I think, by Laurent Guerre and Christophe Jaffrelot, called Muslims in Indian Cities, which you can get it at Oxford University Press, which documents the discrimination experienced by Muslims in Indian cities around India, not just in parts of India which you might associate with Hindutva and the BJP across India. I mean, it's quite clear that there has been a decline in, if there ever was indeed any kind of broad secularism or tolerance or liberalism, that's been in decline quite evidently since the late 1980s and the 1990s. And so the BJP's rise to power and the unleashing of these kind of Hindu majoritarian tendencies is perhaps the culmination of what's been a longer process. And we've seen it in Pakistan. We have our own version of majoritarianism, and in India as well. I mean, this is a culmination of a longer process. But, in a way, Modi and hawks in Pakistan are made for each other because they vindicate each other's stances. And I think the cost of this will be borne by the people of South Asia more so than anyone else. Again, criticizing what the Pakistani state has done historically and what it continues to do does not mean endorsing what India has done. I think, as I said, both sides need to reconsider for their collective good the path they want to take going forward. It just so happens, I think, we have an additional responsibility to make that point about Pakistan being citizens of Pakistan who are concerned about the country's future.
But it's easy, right? कि अभी, like, for instance, before थोड़ा offline हम बात कर रहे थे, we mentioned the Nida Kirmani clip. It's quite easy to malign academics, but a simple solution hai. Don't take Nida Kirmani seriously. Why? Because she supports BLA. Like, literally, I mean, just hateful stuff, right? People would put pictures of the terrorists and say, Nida, take your students. मतलब क्या मिलता है एक तो आपको ये करके? So this what you're saying, you have a measured approach, you have an academic approach, and you're absolutely right. But the fact that once you put that out there, and for the record, we've done a podcast with Nida Kirmani. She does not support BLA.
Yes.
Just to put it out there, but having sympathy for Baloch human rights activists and fighting for their cause, or believing that they deserve human rights, is not the same as supporting terrorism. You can also have sympathy for young people who've been led astray. जिस तरह हम बात कर रहे थे कि state अगर resources नहीं देगा, State agar education nahi dega, health nahi dega, if young people are led astray, you can have sympathy for that and still think that terrorists deserve punishment. Ye either or nahi.
I mean, first of all, I mean, as far as Nida is concerned, I mean, she has the double misfortune of being someone who is willing to sometimes speak truths that need to be said. Also happens to be a woman on social media in Pakistan. I mean, and a lot of I honestly think that it really takes a lot of courage to be able to withstand and continuously take the amount of abuse that she gets, because quite frankly, there's plenty of men out there as well who might have similar opinions, who simply don't have to put up with that kind of abuse. And it is entirely unwarranted. I mean, this entire point about the BLA, I don't understand why people find it so hard to realize that two things can be true at the same time. You can agree that the BLA is a terrorist organization and also agree that Balochistan has suffered at the hands of the state for the past 50 or 60 years. Balochistan has experienced deprivation. Balochistan has been the site of several military conflicts. There was a conflict in the 40s, there was a conflict in the 70s, there was a conflict in the 2000s, and we're seeing another conflict, another insurgency and counterinsurgency being waged today. It's a province that's been torn apart by war. It's a province that's been torn apart by poverty. And it's a province that has truly suffered at the hands of a state that has been cynical and that has been insensitive in its treatment of the Balochi people. That's the simple reality. That's a fact. It's not, Balochistan is not doing well. I mean, putting it very simply. So you can believe that and also agree that, having said that, yes, there are terrorists operating in Balochistan. Yes, there are actions those terrorists will take, that those organizations will take, that are reprehensible, that we cannot agree with. But to delegitimize the legitimate demands of the Balochi people by painting them all in the same brush and saying, because the BLA did this, they're all terrorists, or because the BLA did this, their demands are completely irrelevant, is disingenuous. It's intellectually dishonest, and it's precisely the kind of
you
attitude.
mentioned the F word already. It's the Gobble strategy. आप BLA की बात, BLA तो exist करती है. PTM, vehemently non-violent organization. Very clearly, उनका first mandate non-violence है. And probably half the country thinks they're a terrorist organization because they've been painted as such. And let's be clear, like, are some of these terrorist organizations foreign funded? Absolutely. None of us are saying कि भाई हम करते हैं स्पॉन्सर टेररिज्म भी, हमारे मिलिटेंट ग्रुप्स भी हैं और रॉ कोई दूध का धुला हुआ है, ऑब्वियसली वो भी करते हैं. Obvious सी बात है that there might be connections, they might be responsible for terrorist operations in Pakistan. But supporting the rights of people or wanting people to get human rights is not the same as supporting RAW or any terrorist organization.
It's again, one way in which I've often tried to explain this to people is that, think about it this way. There are fault lines that are exploited by those who wish to exploit them.
Yes.
So are there foreign powers operating in Pakistan? I mean, depending on who you ask, there's between 11 and 50 foreign agencies operating in Pakistan at any given point in time. Putting that to one side, if you were a hostile foreign power and you wanted to foment instability in Pakistan, the best way to do it would be to find an existing fault line and exploit that. If there weren't legitimate grievances to exploit, you wouldn't see the proliferation of terror in this way. If you dealt with those legitimate demands, you would not see radicalization of this sort. You wouldn't find an audience for the machinations of hostile foreign powers. And, you know, I mean, people get touchy when you invoke a comparison with Bangladesh, saying, no, Balochistan is very different. But ultimately, I mean, think about what Pakistan was like in the 60s and the 70s, and think about how the Bengali independence movement, the Bangladeshi independence movement was portrayed then. Think about how Bangladeshis were portrayed then as enemies of the state, as Hindus, as this, that, and in the most horrible terms imaginable. Think about the way in which the 1971 war was conducted. Think about the way in which Bangladeshi intellectuals and students were massacred. Think about some episodes in history like Operation Searchlight, which are utterly and totally reprehensible. These were all perpetrated by a state that refused to recognize earlier on that there were legitimate demands and legitimate grievances that had to be dealt with. In political science, it's almost axiomatic in the literature. When you study movements around the world, repression breeds radicalism. When you repress people, when you don't listen to what they're saying, inevitably something's going to give. Inevitably, they're going to fight back, right? And again, that's not to excuse the actions that they undertake. But again, it's important to recognize that it's important to understand, rather, the roots of a lot of this violence. People say, would you make similar excuses for the Taliban? It's not an excuse, right? You're not excusing what they're doing. What you're saying is, how did the Taliban come about? What are the circumstances that produced them? You know, babies aren't born thinking they're going to grow up to become suicide bombers, right? There's a broader process that leads people to take up arms. There's a broader process that radicalizes people. And the point that people have to understand is, how can we intervene in that process of radicalization? How can we prevent that from happening? And that's where the concern for these genuine grievances becomes so important. You can nip that radicalization in the bud by recognizing the humanity of the people that you're fighting, of the people that you're oppressing, and then giving them the rights and the dignity that they're asking for. And if you continue to oppress them, they're going to fight back. And they're going to fight back in ways that may be reprehensible and should be condemned, but ultimately can also be understood.
And that narrative that you're talking about, the Taliban, I think we've moved beyond it being an excuse, not only in a national consciousness, that exists in a global consciousness. I don't know if you watch Homeland. I do feel it's quite a far-right propaganda show at times. They had an entire season portraying a Taliban suicide bomber as somebody who deserves sympathy, because उसके जब खानदान की शादी हो रही थी तो कैरी ने ड्रोन अटैक करके बॉम्ब कर दिया था. A show like Homeland, which is bigoted and xenophobic, still very fun to watch a lot of times. If they can portray that, हमारी तो ये national consciousness में है already कि यार ओ बेचारे, अगर आप अमेरिका ड्रोन हमला करके इनके पूरे घर को मार देता है, तो if a kid puts on a suicide vest after that, there is a level of sympathy. Not to say somebody should put on a suicide vest and do that, but that level of sympathy exists. And it's not the same as being like, would you also have the same sympathy for Osama bin Laden, जो कि प्राइम मिनिस्टर ने तो शहीद करार दे दिया है, लेकिन you don't have sympathy for the mastermind of people who are leading these kids astray, but you can have sympathy for kids. Even think about the worst thing that has happened in Pakistan, or at least in terms of terrorism, APS. It breaks every single person's heart. मतलब उसपे कोई दो राय नहीं हो सकती. It's still a part. It's almost a part of the consciousness of every single Pakistani. It hurts to this day. उसके जो जिन्होंने किया, like what level of dehumanizing needs to happen for a person to take up a gun and shoot kids at a school? Like how fucked were they in the heads? What happened? We need to prevent that from happening.
I mean, and that's in a way a good way of thinking about it. That look, there will be people, there will be your masterminds out there. There will be these kind of violence entrepreneurs who will try to manipulate, who will try to exploit other people and conflicts and cleavages in society for their own interests, whatever those may be. They may be ideological interests, they may be material interests. Those are the kind of cynical masterminds. But then you have the foot soldiers. And the foot soldiers, I mean, again, studies of militant organizations around the world show this. that there generally tend to be a diverse bunch of people. It doesn't matter whether you're talking about some kind of anti-colonial freedom fighter. It doesn't matter whether you're talking about terrorists. It doesn't matter whether you're talking about ethno-national militants. They tend to come from diverse backgrounds and have diverse reasons for joining. Some people will do it for mercenary interests. Some people will do it out of a sense of, because it gives them a sense of empowerment. Some people will do it out of a sense of vengeance, so on and so forth. And that's precisely the point. You have to intervene in a way that prevents people from turning to violence. Because, you inevitably you will have to fight the ones who do turn to violence. You will have to prevent school children from being shot. You will have to kill terrorists. You will have to fight militant organizations that have declared war against you. But what you really ideally want to do is to prevent those militant organizations from emerging in the first place. And there's two ways of doing that. One way is to try and just wipe them out. That usually doesn't work, or if it does work, it comes at a tremendous human cost. Drone strikes, for example, military operations. You might wipe out the terrorist organizations, but you're going to leave ruin and devastation in their wake. Or you, again, make the kind of socioeconomic interventions that prevent that from happening. You give people a stake in the system. You say, look, here are your economic opportunities. Here's your schooling, here's your welfare, ultimately, I think most people, the vast majority of people, want to live peaceful and stable lives. And you just want to say, here's your opportunity to do that. Why turn to violence when you can do this instead? And I think that's the point that needs to be understood. And so again, it's not about excusing the Taliban. There's no excuse for killing school children. And again, I'm also not entirely, I wouldn't even say that, you've got brainwashed militants killing school children. They are brainwashed at some level, but one can argue everyone always has some level of agency over what they're doing. There's a big difference between attacking a military checkpoint, for instance, and attacking school children. And even most militants.
How far gone do you have to be to do that? What level of humanity is left in you after you decide to do something like that? And then फिर उसके जो planner हैं वो तो फिर state के दोस्त बन गए ना, उनको तो पता नहीं टर्की में कहाँ पर हैं, अल्लाह को पता.
And that's the thing. I mean, and that's what's particularly depressing in a way about the debate in Pakistan, that you're going to delegitimize the entire Baloch struggle for humanity, for dignity, for rights, these legitimate grievances, because of the actions of one terrorist organization. And you're going to disregard that long-running conflict for this reason. But at the same time, you have a state that has historically been more than happy to work with militants, to work with terrorists, to sow instability at home and abroad in the pursuit of broader strategic objectives. It's that hypocrisy that is the most galling. People attack Nida for simply making, I think, the valid point that we need to understand what makes a terrorist. We need to understand how this process happens. Without understanding it, we can't deal with it. That's something that you're going to attack someone for, but you're not going to attack a state that has historically manufactured and produced terror and has had to pay for it, as we've seen over the past decade with Pakistan's internal war against militancy. I mean, that's the hypocrisy, I think, that needs to be confronted as well.
So we started the discussion by you saying, from a sociological perspective, everybody makes a rational decision based on the information they've received. Garbage in hoga to garbage out hoga. Now, if I am somebody who is now going to make a rational decision based on Pakistan की मैंने history देखी है, मुझे, let's say मैं सिंधी हूँ, मुझे rights, मुझे लगता है human rights struggle है. I see movements like PTM which are non-violent, and I see how they've been curbed and destroyed and painted as the worst human beings possible. Then I see movements like TTP, which is a terrorist organization, and जो literally bomb blast किए हैं, बच्चे मारे हमारे, उसको सालों साल इमरान खान was like, जीन से तो बात करें, ये तो हमारे हैं, भटके हुए लोग हैं. Then I see Hassanullah getting a whatever state benefits जो भी मिले उनको, तो I'll be like, ये तो बेहतर है. जो आप बॉम्ब फाड़ते हैं, बच्चे मारते हैं, इनको तो ये लोग बुला लेते हैं, दोस्त बना लेते हैं. बट जो लोग प्यार से अपने राइट्स मांगते हैं उनको तबाह कर देते हैं, तो बेहतर है if you want your human rights or if you want to be in a position of bargaining, then you need
Well,
to be
again,
a terrorist.
as I said before, certainly some people do actually think that way. I mean, there have been studies on Karachi. There have been studies on, you know, Islamist militants and sectarian militants, rather, in southern Punjab that kind of emphasize this point that for many of, again, the foot soldiers, it's a sense of empowerment they get from this. I mean, they confront a system in which they're the lowest of the low. They're not rich, they're not well connected, they haven't had the right opportunities in life. And all of a sudden, they see these armed gangs basically wandering around, wielding power. You know, they've got respect. They inspire fear. They've got guns. People listen to them, and they think, look, what's the point of working within a system in which I have no chance of making any progress when I could just join this organization and work for them and, you know, get the power and the respect that I feel I'm entitled to. That is, again, an important and powerful kind of pull towards radicalization. And once you start getting involved with these organizations, then the radicalization only deepens, the brainwashing only deepens. Then you might join initially because it makes you feel powerful, but over time you come to believe the ideology as well. You come to believe the politics as well. That kind of entire dehumanization process that you were referring to earlier. You start to drink that Kool-Aid, and you start to actually believe in this cause independently of the sense of empowerment that you get. So again, I mean, it's not, people are complicated, and people make complicated decisions for very complicated reasons. And as I said, there are various reasons why people will join these organizations, but it's also clear that the pull towards that kind of radicalization is reduced when people feel they have a stake in the system, when people feel that they can improve their lives within the system that exists. And until more effort is made to provide that, you're going to continue to see these kinds of problems emerging.
What you're saying makes complete sense to me as a Karachiite, because MQM ka yahi experience hai. A lot of these kids who probably did not have any power or felt like there's discrimination against Muhajirs, जो actually भी होगी. अब अगर आप सेक्टर इंचार्ज बन गए हो, अब बिल्डिंग में भी सब आपकी सुनते हैं. लिटरली तो माँ बाप जो आपको गालियां दे रहे थे कि तुम तो कुछ भी नहीं करोगे, अब उसकी भी इज्जत है. आप घर आते हो, आपके घर के बाहर कचरा होता है, वो भी साफ हो जाता है. There is a social status that comes with that. So you might not aspire. And plus आपने fault lines की बात की थी. A lot of times हम ही create करते हैं fault lines. There is a lot of role of the state in creating MQM. And then now we claim कि ये तो सारा raw funded था. तो आपने ही तो बनाई थी फिर fault line. तो अगर आप बनाओगे तो कोई exploit कर लेगा.
वही बात है ना कि देखो, अगर fault line नहीं होगी तो exploit नहीं हो सकती. अगर आप बलोचियों को rights दे देंगे तो, you know, no one can just waltz in and say, go fight for your rights. Here's some guns, go take your rights. I already have my rights. Why should I go fight for that? It's really that simple. So again, this entire point about, you know, oh, they're terrorists, we should condemn them. Of course we condemn them, right? Of course you condemn people who target innocents. Of course you condemn people who engage in acts of terror, right? But we can't just stop at condemnation. We have to also understand, not because, you know, there's some kind of humanitarian impulse that leads us to do so and to empathize with the perpetrators of terror, but because understanding is key to preventing this from happening again. And it doesn't matter whether it's the BLA, it doesn't matter whether it's the Taliban, it doesn't, any armed movement, any violent struggle, there are fault lines and cleavages underlying it that prompted that struggle to emerge. And that's what we mean when we talk about dealing with the root cause. Until you deal with the root cause, these problems will not go away. And usually, historically, violence is not the best way to deal with this root cause. As I said, with the root cause, as I said about Balochistan, we've seen several military operations in Balochistan over the past 70 years. They didn't solve the problem. There's no reason to believe they will now. The solution to Balochistan's problems lies in, again, recognizing and addressing the legitimate grievances that the people of Balochistan have.
Just to bring it all together at the end, I think a lot of times when we have these ideological debates, fundamentalism hai, Sharia law hai, I think we completely ignore the economics of it. We really don't factor it in, which might just be the biggest factor. Jab Mumtaz Qadri ki protest hui thi, which I feel is a great metaphor for what Pakistan is. Military helicopter जा रहे थे और वो नीचे उनको चप्पलें मार रहे थे. I think that image is a great metaphor for where the struggle lies. The economically disenfranchised, they literally all they have is कि वो helicopter को चप्पल मार सकते हैं, because that's all that they're wearing. So even though the protest was in favor of Mumtaz Qadri, and obviously I'm against all of that, इतनी तो मेरी सबको liberal values पता है अब तक, तो obviously I can't be an apologist for them. But 15 में से 13 demands इनकी economic थी. अब इंसान बोले कि आप एक ये religious movement है which is talking about whatever they're talking about, आपकी 95% demands तो economic है. So even they realize कि what they really need is economic franchise to not live like they live.
I mean, it's again, there's lots of people have looked at these questions in a kind of international and a comparative perspective. And again, there's some patterns that we see. I mean, we can argue about the causes, we can argue about the different combinations of causes that yield these results, but there are some patterns that we find. And one of those patterns is that cross-nationally, wealthier societies tend to be more stable. Stable in the sense that they will have, for instance, they will have racism, they will have class divide, they will have inequality, they'll have all kinds of problems. What they generally don't tend to have, though, is insurgencies, civil war, violent internal conflict. And again, one possible reason, I mean, for instance, there's this one scholar, Adam Jaworski, who calculated in a paper, I think about 20 years ago, that once you hit a per capita income of about $5,000 a year, democratic institutions tend to become self-perpetuating. They don't collapse. Below that level, depending on how poor you are, democracy collapses. And one of the possible reasons why that is because there's just so much what he called distributional conflict. There's just so much kind of fighting over what is basically a very small pie that it's very difficult to maintain a certain level of stability. So there is certainly something to the idea that economic prosperity for everyone is one of the keys to long-term stability and one of the keys to perhaps a more moderate form of politics. It's not the only one, by the way. And again, I think especially in the Pakistani case, it's important to remember that, as you were saying as well, a lot of this is self-inflicted. A lot of this is because of fault lines and because of policies that the state has historically implemented that have given birth to these particular problems, whether we're talking in terms of center-province relations, whether we're talking about militancy and sectarianism, and the role Islam plays in our politics and our public discourse.
A lot of that can also be boiled down to economics. Even अगर आप बांग्लादेश के example देखें, Asim Azad had a great point कि मुल्क बनते हैं, मुल्क टूटते हैं, but Pakistan is the first country in the world and the only where a majority seceded into another country.
Bilkul. I mean, I will say this. I do think that economic reform, and not just reform, I mean, it's not just about economic growth, more fundamentally, reform with kind of redistribution and equity at its heart is probably the most important thing that Pakistan requires. I mean, sometimes we get so caught up in these kinds of discussions about ideology in Islam and secularism, or about the civil military imbalance in Pakistan, that we forget fundamentally a lot of the problem is simply that Pakistan is a very unequal society. And that inequality isn't just this kind of economic inequality spills into other realms. Economic inequality maps onto political inequality, social inequality, and the sense of exclusion and deprivation that animates so many people. And addressing that is fundamental to addressing Pakistan's broader problems. I mean, again, it's not an either-or situation. You can kind of work on those other things, ideology and so on and so forth as well. But certainly, I would agree with the idea that fundamentally it is about inequality and the distribution of resources in Pakistan.
तो आप कह रहे हैं हमें दुश्मन के बच्चे को पढ़ाना है? बात तो सही है, बात उनकी बिल्कुल सही है.
हाँ, I mean, at the end of the day,
पढ़ाना क्या है, इस पे थोड़ा सवालिया निशान है. वो ना पढ़ाएं जो हमें पढ़ा रहे हैं.
हाँ, ये भी है. I mean, again, there's a lot to be pessimistic about. Because one of the things you see, I mean, and this is a joke that I think many historians in Pakistan make as well, that if you go through the archives, if you ever read newspapers in Pakistan going back to the late 40s, Pakistan हमेशा एक नाजुक मोड़ से गुजर रहा. It's always a नाजुक मोड़. And the
roundabout है ये नाजुक मोड़.
Exactly. And when you go through the archives, you can't help but just feel despair at the fact that we continue to make the same mistakes again and again and again. We never learn from our own history. Whether that's in terms of the failure to democratize, whether that's in terms of our foreign policy, whether it's in terms of militancy, whether it's in terms of center-province relations, wahi galtiyan ho rahi hain. And I think, again, there needs to be a kind of reckoning. There needs to be a greater understanding of precisely why that is and what needs to be done about it. Because the status quo, I mean, lots of people have promised to change the status quo in Pakistan. Imran Khan is not the first person to promise them. Ultimately, it never happens. And we need to think long and hard about why that's the case and what can be done to kind of break this pattern.
Eat the rich.
I'm a big fan of eating the rich, to be honest. But, कुछ लोग offend होते हैं जब आप कहते हो eat the rich. And I just want to clarify, I literally mean eat them. मैं ये नहीं कह रहा, मैं metaphorically नहीं बोल रहा, मैं तो कह रहा खाओ उनको. Seriously.
आप Alex Jones level पे हैं. Where is like, I will eat my neighbor.
Eat the lizard people. Yes.
हाँ, वो अली उस्मान ने पोस्ट किया ना, लम्स में भी आ गए. Proven Illuminati.
हाँ, lizard people आ गए. काफी देर से हैं वैसे, but
हाँ, वो lizard नहीं है, वो LUMS के जो Illuminati group है, वो है सारा. So yes, I think we do need to fundamentally change the status quo. फिर कभी इसको भी discuss करेंगे कि colonialism कितना responsible है. But if you want to give a short answer to that question.
My academic work actually is mostly on precisely this question, and the short answer.
एक घंटा और जरा इस पे भी.
एक घंटा 10 घंटे. But the short answer is, to a very large extent, yes. Colonialism put in place patterns of institutional development that have been reproduced over time. हमारी गलती कहाँ है? हमारी गलती यहाँ कि the same people who were empowered by colonialism, the military, landed elites, and other kinds of elites, have been able to successfully use colonial institutions, have been able to successfully reproduce and build upon colonial institutions to maintain a status quo that benefits them. So colonialism, in a way, put in place the framework that has subsequently been used by elites to perpetuate their own power. And so, to a very large extent, I agree, colonialism has a lot to do with the current state of affairs in Pakistan. वो जो एक colonial legacy होती है ना, we're still contending with that today as well.
तो ये तो violence के बगैर ground norm change नहीं होगा?
हो सकता है. I mean,
what's the famous quote? If you make peaceful revolution impossible, then you make violent revolution inevitable.
I mean, though there are a couple of things. I think for me, the question of change in Pakistan, it's clear to me that change will only come through some kind of popular movement. A popular movement that places the needs of the people at its heart. Because you could, for instance, have a popular movement that was very right-wing in its orientation. I'm talking about the other kind of popular movement.
Yeah. I mean, Modi is popular.
Modi is certainly popular in his own way. You need to have a popular movement that puts the kind of economic and the social interests of the people at its heart. Without that, and that popular movement could potentially work through traditional political channels, through kind of democratic channels. It could work outside of the democratic system. But without that kind of popular support, change isn't going to happen. The problem, of course, is building that kind of movement is very difficult to do. And building that kind of movement is doubly difficult when you consider that the powers that be, the entrenched elites, military and otherwise, are heavily invested in not allowing such a movement to emerge, let alone succeed. So it's a challenge. It's certainly something that is not easy to do. It's something that may not happen. But that is ultimately what I think all progressives, that is what I think all people interested in a more prosperous Pakistan should ultimately work towards. A popular movement that is democratic, that is inclusive, and that is fundamentally about improving the lives of the people of Pakistan. That's what will be required. And as I said, it doesn't have to be violent, but it will be difficult to build. And we must, I think, constantly work towards building a movement of that kind.
Benevolent dictator में आपका कोई भरोसा नहीं है.
नहीं, I mean, interestingly, benevolent dictator, I know कि काफी
हम भूल जाते हैं वैसे ही सारी जो हमारी नेशनल साइकी जो है ना, ये बहुत छोटी सी है. Throughout Musharraf, everybody like benevolent dictator.
I mean, benevolent dictators का ये है, unfortunately, there's like three who by some measure could be worldwide, who could be called benevolent dictators. And everyone looks at those three and thinks, सारे इसी तरह हो सकते हैं. You know, I mean, people say, हाँ, Lee Kuan Yew ने ये किया था, इसलिए इमरान खान भी Lee Kuan Yew बन सकते हैं, मुशर्रफ भी बन सकते हैं, या भी बन सकते हैं. I mean, independently of the other problematic things one could kind of mention about people like Lee Kuan Yew, the simple fact of the matter is, for every Lee Kuan Yew, you've got like hundreds of other guys who are absolutely awful. And dictators generally tend to be awful, and there's various reasons why they're awful. But again, it's one of those patterns that you will consistently find. Dictators are terrible. But we still, as you said, cling to this belief कि नहीं, हमारा dictator benevolent dictator होगा. And again, that's again tied to this broader process of myth making and ideology that we see in Pakistan, that we see the state engage in repeatedly.
There's a reason there's a dick in dictator.
Yes,
a lot about who they are as people. कोई optimistic बात है इसको close करने से पहले आप कोई nation को message देना चाहेंगे hope का कि घबराना नहीं है, इधर होंगी?
No, not really. As I said before, I mean,
सब मरेंगे कोई
inevitably, in the long run, we all will, and maybe COVID is what will do it. But
सिर्फ कब्र में.
It's sukoon sirf qabr mein. I mean, that was what he was possibly right about. The one thing Imran Khan is right about.
He's doing a great job at giving us sukoon sooner than we would have gotten it otherwise.
I mean, it's difficult to see a silver lining at this point in time. If anything, I mean, one could argue that the experience of the past few years has, if anything, betrayed a lot of the optimism and hope that people might have been feeling. I mean, again, it's that thing about binaries and people not being able to believe two things can be true at once. Whenever you say something bad about Imran Khan or the PTI or the military, everyone automatically says, oh, you love Nawaz, oh, you love Benazir, oh, wo corruption chahte ho, ye chahte ho, wo chahte ho. What I want to see is a process. What I want to see is, if nothing else, incremental changes. I want to see a process start to be institutionalized through which people start to hold their leaders accountable. People start to engage in the democratic process in an uninterrupted way. But what we've seen over the past few years is a kind of backsliding, right? At the end of the day, our leaders are also products of the system that we find ourselves in. Nawaz Sharif, Benazir, Imran Khan, all these people were all products of a very dysfunctional political system. The system needs to change for our leaders to change. And that's only going to change over time. It requires patience. It requires an ability to, in a sense, pursue a path of change over an extended period of time. Democracy doesn't grow overnight. Inequality doesn't disappear overnight. These are processes that have to be allowed to develop in a relatively organic fashion. And 10 saal, 15 saal, 25 saal, you'll have to deal with horrible leaders, horrible governments. But the hope is that at the end of that, slowly but surely, you begin to see improvements in different areas. And certainly, I mean, there are some areas in which you've seen that even in Pakistan. If you look at Punjab and KP in particular, for instance, you have seen over the past decade or so small incremental improvements in various things. Again, some of those indicators I was mentioning earlier, literacy, child mortality, so on and so forth, some of those things have slowly started to improve. But unfortunately, I think what's happened over the past couple of years is that once again, the process has been interrupted. And we're kind of devolving back into the kind of politics that we had in the 1990s. Koi pata nahi, by the end of all of this, we might be back in the 1980s. But that's why I think at this particular moment is a pessimistic one to be in. So again, I don't really have a positive. I'm not a particularly positive person, to be honest. But there isn't much cause for optimism, I think, in Pakistan right now.
फिक्र मत करें guys, कल से पाकिस्तान में तेल मिलेगा और हम सब पर कैपिटा इनकम हमारी $5,000 से ज़्यादा हो जाएगी. ये पक्की इन्फॉर्मेशन है मेरे पास. So before all of you die of pessimism, let me give you that. But thank you so much for joining us. It was a pleasure talking to you. It was very insightful and very informative. So thank you.
Thank you. I hope so.
And thank you very much for listening. Take care. Bye-bye.